Hello, hello.
Good evening.
Good Thinking 44.
Good Thinking 44, the podcast about marketing trends and other things I'm sharing on Slack.
Lots to dive into, both coming away from weekends away with girl trips.
Yeah. I was in Prague. It was lovely. Never been before. Had so many fun discoveries, just so many fun discoveries. Cool brands, cool European brands that I hadn't heard of, cool wellness brands I hadn't heard of. It was lovely.
I love it.
Delicious food. Delicious food.
Oh, always good. Always good.
Yeah.
And I was in the desert with best friend's 50th birthday, full moon. We saw UFOs and did a sound bath.
And maybe some other things.
Maybe. Okay, so lots to dig into, a lot of controversial big news kind of things to dig into this letter. I think we'll do the format in a little bit different way. We'll kind of dig into your recommendation of the one thing we need to know, a couple of others, and then we'll jump around and maybe do a deeper dive in the fun things.
Let's do it.
All right, mass health. Let's start where you recommended.
Mass health. Yeah, I just thought it was very interesting. So that particular bit, the article that I linked to, was about how Walmart is expanding into more healthy, smaller. I wouldn't necessarily say smaller because can we say Poppy's small anymore? I don't think so. Smaller, in the sodas, and more healthy, quote unquote healthy. But what I thought was really interesting is it's obvious that Walmart is investing in putting, and I think, Target does this too, but Walmart is what this was talking about, is expanding their aisles to have more shelf space for these particular kind of more wellness categories, or I would say even just smaller brands. And my question to the group, I guess, in the letter was is Walmart coming for the Shoppy Shop? Is that where we're going to go and discover, is it becoming the pop-up grocer that is in every city from Indiana to Austin to wherever you shop at a Walmart? Because that would be very game-changing, I think, for a lot of small brands.
For sure, to go into, and Target's done that in a little bit, but Walmart would, probably be able to do it in even a larger way if they really honed in on it. But I think it's that balance of finding those things and then through their supply chain being able to do that.
And that's the interesting thing. And so many of these small brands are not really set up for they're not set up with these big wholesale accounts, and, the way that those buys happen are not necessarily through one individual person at a time, right? They're buying from wholesale groups where they're kind of aggregated and things like that. So I see Sprouts doing it. Sprouts has a section in their stores now where it's new discoveries. And essentially when you get in, a small brand like Omsum was in there, and they have about 3 months or 3 to 6 months to essentially prove that they have the buying power from people in order to get permanent shelf space at Sprouts.
Wow.
And so that's a lot of pressure for a small brand. It's a huge opportunity, though. But also pressure, but opportunity. I mean, the pressure of running a D2C business is obviously not easy either. So I think it's interesting time to see Walmart doing this. And I do wonder, I think it will obviously be bigger brands, not the really small brands.
Right.
But, Fly by Jing has been in every store known to man for a while. But those types of brands, there's more indie brands, I suppose, coming up.
Right. I mean, I have so many questions off of this. I think kudos to Walmart if they're really able to do this and pull it off. Are they going for the discovery portion, right? And so then questions off of if it's more discovery, is it more discovery and kind of the new cool brands, or is it the health, which has a little bit of a different lens? Either way, you can get the new cool brands, but which one are you going for? And two, if you are going for the discovery and the new brands, once you get a new brand in and it's at Walmart, are you no longer onto it, as kind of, first to market? Are you no longer on it because it's no longer discoverable if it's in, all of the Walmarts? How do you
Yeah.
reconcile that?
And I think for a certain audience, like you're very LA based, right? And so like I think for you, like it might have that. It's the same way that you had that feeling with Starbucks and AG1, right? Like for you,
Mm-hmm.
you were like, ooh, it suddenly gave me the ick where you
Right.
were like really into it, and then you got the ick from it being at Starbucks, even though you like both brands. So there's like something funny about that. I
Yeah.
think that for people who don't live in a place that has an Air One,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
What?
the majority, I think the discoverability and the ease of, like, if you're not living in New York City, Chicago, or LA, your chances having a cool shoppy shop is like if you happen to live, like, obviously, if you live in Cincinnati, or, there's lots of
Yeah.
cool, and even Columbus, and there's lots of cool Midwest cities that I personally adore spending time in, that do have these tiny little stores, but their capacity to carry all the cool brands that you want are like is not possible.
Right.
And so then Walmart coming in and saying and positioning itself and saying like, yeah, we are this like equitable access to these smaller brands is interesting. I think what will be really difficult is like a lot of these brands really aren't necessarily ready for that kind of attention, like,
Yeah.
can they keep up with the sales at Walmart? Can they maintain the margin, like, all the sales that Walmart expects them to make? Like, and they're laying out all this product, and it's a lot of risk, and they're creating way more than they would create if they were selling direct to consumer, right? Like, they have to make enough to put on the shelves of all of these different places. The risk of that and the amount of investment they need to do that is way higher. So the barrier for entry automatically like changes.
Right. And it affects, how they do everything for sure. And then they would focus probably majorly on a Walmart and maybe not some of their other indie retailers, indie outlets that were giving them some cachet within that, because Walmart would be such a big buy. I mean, it's interesting to think about how, like, the larger scale, how it would really impact just, their Walmart supply chain if they can figure it out, but also everybody else's manufacturing, positioning, kind of all of those parts and pieces, because it would really, I mean, it has the ability, if done right, to really, make a brand.
Totally. And I think that Sephora has done this, like, and I think Sephora's kind of positioned themselves as like, they have Sol de Janeiro, and they have Glow Recipe, and they have all these things that like you just wouldn't have access to these things to try and smell and touch and taste, like, not that you should be tasting Glow Recipe, but like to do all of that if you're, living in even Colorado.
Right. But I think Sephora's a perfect example. And I thought of the same example because I know, kind of the warning is, if you're a new brand at Sephora, make sure you can get in the 15 doors before you expand to the 300, because you've got to do that right and figure that out and make sure you're basically not fucking it up. And then you can maybe expand to the 300. Like, I think there's a very thoughtful, kind of demanding process within that for brands to really be able to stick to that and ensure that they're doing that. So I think it's fascinating to see Walmart just being, obviously so much larger, how that would really impact. The other question I have is, from a Walmart standpoint, is this like a brand play? Are we just saying like, oh, we just think it's interesting and we'll add a end cap and get some people in to kind of have this discovery thing? Or is it a really brand play of like, okay, we've got this huge audience, we've established ourselves as this, but we want to make things more discoverable. We want to introduce things. We want to create more of an experience in store. Like, is this more of a brand play that they're looking to further, extend to?
It certainly feels like it is. Like, I think they're trying to elevate the appearance of the brand, the feel of the brand, right? Like, I think for a long time, Walmart was the cheaper, uglier, less nice brother of Target, and I think they don't want to be there. The reality is also that Temu and like now Amazon Haul and all of these more budget brands have kind of taken up that space that Walmart had, where it was like, oh, we're the affordable young like brother to this other more bougie brand, and they don't have that anymore. So they're not playing on price as much, in my opinion. Right. So they have to play up to the quality or the selection, and they have to differentiate from, like, I can get, you can go on Temu and, like, I don't know, get whatever you want for pennies nothing on the dollar.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. Yeah, excited to see where this plays. I absolutely agree with you. I think it's a huge opportunity for brands and for Walmart, and I hope they nail it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that's interesting to me about them is that their locations tend to be like, they have a location, for example, like right next to my mother-in-law, right? And she lives in like the middle of Connecticut, and there's no Target like for quite a while, like around her, and she doesn't live in this kind of like cool neighborhood where Target would probably be more located. Yeah. And so I think it is interesting to see, like, what are those demographics really looking like? Are they older? And are they going to get and understand Poppy? Or would they not get it at all? I think it will be interesting to see if their consumer keeps up with them. Mm-hmm. But potentially, I think they're also in a position to like have a very different benefit to Target, who's maybe not focusing on those kinds of consumers to begin with.
For sure. Yeah, it's very different. All right, well, stay tuned. Stay tuned. Can we hit on Wicked?
I mean, I just couldn't. Okay, so I'll give the context, because we always try to give the context, because I just want to dive right in and just like laugh about it. Wicked, I mean, we could talk about Wicked actually, and I want to talk about this in the next newsletter, so we can talk about Wicked in a big way, because I think it's very fascinating, and I'll tell you why in a second. But to get back to what you were talking about in the newsletter, they put out a doll, like a Wicked Barbie doll, basically, and on the back of the box, instead of saying wickedmovie.com, which would be the correct URL, it just said wicked.com. And wicked.com is not the movie URL, and it's a porn site. So a lot of kids, quote unquote, got led to this place. But here's my feeling on it. There wasn't really a QR code, so I don't know what kid is like sitting there typing in wicked.com to find that website. Yeah. So I get why everyone is up in arms, but I desperately want to know who found that, because that the person that found it had already been on wicked.com and knew that it was not the right website, right? Because there's no way that you're like, oh, I want to go and see wicked.com's movie, so I'm going to look on the back of this box to find the URL. That's not how you search for anything in the history of anything in the world. So some Hawkeye parent with an interest in porn was clearly reading the back of the box.
Yeah.
And then also, I guess you could probably just like wonder if that was the case, because obviously Wicked could get confused with that easily.
Yes. I mean, that's a larger brand URL naming.
Yeah. Conundrum. So I mean, I feel terrible because, like everyone's like, that production designer, the designer on that is like never going to have a job again. And it's like, if you've ever worked inside of a company where you actually put packaging on the side of the box, you were never typing that thing out. You're copying and pasting it from some document. So don't worry about the production designer. Worry about the producer or the project manager who was in charge of that folder of copy, because it was probably more likely the copywriter who messed it up. But I think what would be more fun to talk about is the Barbie-fication of movies. So I don't know if you've been spending... Yeah. So I've been watching this rollout of Wicked, right? And Wicked is not a movie that I emotionally connect with the way I think a lot of people are connecting with it. It's not something like I watched the original one. I think there was an original one, like clearly. I don't know what I'm talking about. But what I think is so interesting is when Barbie came out, it's like they took the playbook and they were like, how do we make the playbook bigger, right? And so they did merch collabs. They did, huge, enormous kind of press rollouts and all of the things, right? They did so much stuff. And Wicked is now taking that playbook and doing, like, the number of Wicked merch collabs is insane. Like, it's like you can't like almost go onto a mass retailer without finding a Wicked product. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so interesting to see how the success of Barbie is clearly being tied to its marketing and not necessarily just the movie. And now all of these movies kind of following suit and following that playbook.
Yeah, I mean, I think to a degree there was always merch and always, parts and pieces of it.
Of Barbie.
Yeah. I mean, I think Barbie, the real takeaways, and listen, he's killing it now at Gap, right? The CEO. So like, it's hopefully moving with him and showing him it's not just the stuff or the this or the that. Yes, you have a question?
I've got feelings about Gap, but keep going.
But I mean, but it was because it was brave. It was because it was like, there were so many things about it, to my point, and it was such a cultural moment, and they really pushed it. And I give such kudos to Mattel for being a corporate company, being able to tell that story and push that story, as well as Barbie at all of kind of the parts and pieces. But my point is, I just think there were so many other elements that made Barbie such a cultural phenomenon, so successful, all of those parts and pieces, in addition to their merch. But I do think the merch standpoint, I see the parallels for sure. And we'll tell you, like, we were at Target, and the Wicked and how they've displayed it, and then the connection piece and the branding, like, it's really thoughtfully done. And to your point, it's not just an end cap, like, it's an entire area. And my daughter, who's never seen it, and again, I think I don't know if it's Disney, whoever did the movie, like, I think there have been, in my opinion, these brilliant kind of reincarnations of movies, and Wicked is off of Wizard of Oz. Like, I don't think it's a thing that was, right, but they've like created it off of a story, like Disney's done a lot of versions of, and I think it's amazing. Around the witches and things like that. So she's dying to see it. Like, she's excited whenever November 24th, I think we'll be away, but whatever, she wants to go and see it. And she's already into the merch, to your point, and like a fan of all of the parts and pieces. So it's for sure working.
Yeah, I just think that they're doing it bigger. I know that there's always been merch. Like, obviously you get, like, I have a bunch of friends who work in the Nickelodeon, like, merch space. Like, I am very well acquainted with, like, the kids' merch. But I think what's different is that they're doing merch for adults. They're doing like these, the clips and the press tour clips and all of these things. And the casting is great. But she's also doing commercials for different products. I mean, it's just like, it's very big. And I think for a long time, movies like were like that, and then they kind of went away, and then Barbie came along and was like, no, that playbook worked, but like we'll supersize that playbook, and that really worked. And now I think we're in this new era of like the Barbie-fication of all of these movies.
I completely agree. And I think the real like difference, or at least I hope for me, what the secret sauce is, and what a lot of what we do is like, what Barbie really did, like the Venn diagram piece that was new was around culture, right? It was really about doing that. And I agree with you. Wicked is also trying to replicate that and really see, okay, where do we fit into culture, into adults, into kids, into all of the parts and pieces.
Yeah. No, I think it's really interesting to talk about the Gap for a second. And I know this wasn't on our list of things to talk about, but I have some feelings, some hot takes after being in Prague.
Tell me your feelings.
Okay, so you know how you and I have gone to New York several times recently and been like, where the fuck are the Gaps?
But LA too. Like, so the Gap, the retail footprint is, yes.
There are none, right? So like,
we need to talk to their real estate department. Yeah.
Well, so this is the funny thing is that I go to Prague and there's 2 Gaps in both of the big malls. So I'm like, oh, Gap. Like, it's the first time that I've found a physical Gap. So I'm like, okay. And then, it's Prague. So like, grain of salt, like it may not be like what I'm thinking of as being the thing, but they have the commercial, right? The commercial of the singing, the a cappella group thing that I talked about, that I was so beautiful and emotional. And I was like, like their marketing is like, I am obsessed, right? Like I write about it all the time. I could not have been more disappointed with the store. Like literally could not have been sadder, could not have tried to want to like it more. And just walked out, and so my best friend who I was with on this trip is like, when we were 16, 17, I'm pretty sure 100% of her closet was the Gap. Like she's like the Gap. So like you're going in with 2 people who are like pretty big fans of this brand, right? Neither of us could stay in there for more than a minute. We were like, what is this product? It was so lifeless. There was no, like, I can't remember what the tagline was. Oh no, I wish I
Yeah.
took a photo of it. But there was a terrible tagline on the like display about like something about social media and sharing and for the holidays. But like the product just did not live up to the moment. Oh, it was something called Gift the Logo. That's what the tagline was that they're going with. Gift the logo. And then underneath everything
So that
is
maybe
just
just
like,
Prague.
I don't know.
That's not
It
great.
felt like a rollout. And because it had all of the imagery of the
I'm sure it
from
was
the campaign. And it was just, the classic Gap, old school like Gap logos, which I know are popular. But it just felt like, who is this for? I just could not figure it out. Like, I was like, this is definitely not for me. And then I was saying to my friend, if it's not for me, and I'm pretty used to, as somebody who does this a lot, going into stores and being like, this is not for me, but I can tell exactly who this is for. And I love it for that reason. Like, I'm not going to shop at Arico Vert, the jewelry store, but when I see their retail experiences, like, I'm like, yes, like, that's cool. Like, kids would think that's amazing. So, we're young women, kids. But who was this for? Like, she couldn't find product for her husband. She couldn't find product for her kids. Like, both of us were just wandering around for a straight minute trying to figure out, like, where we were supposed to shop in these enormous gaps. Like, they were big.
Right.
Nothing.
Fascinating.
So
fascinating.
I think I'm just gonna end and then we can talk about how you're feeling about it. But like, for me, like, what is really difficult is when a brand does all of this amazing cultural stuff and then can't get the product right. And I know a lot of product takes a long time, but if you go in there and you've built this up, and it's a little bit like you were saying earlier today about the Victoria's Secret thing, and like, take your moment, like, this is your moment. Gap is in its moment, right? It's got 6 months of zeitgeist left in it before we all kind of get bored. And that made me not want to buy any of their product. I will still be fangirling over here if they do some cool marketing, but I'm not going back. I'm not going to try to go back to that store.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating, and we should like completely dissect this, but I don't know if we have the 3 hours that we could both talk about this for. We talk, it's brand and product, right? It's brand and product, and the product carries you when the brand is, not doing so well, and the brand can carry you when the product is not doing so well. And that's what we're seeing right now, clearly, right? The brand, they came in hot, he's doing amazing things. We all think it's cool as shit. You've talked about it a ton in the newsletter. There's things that are really, really relevant and that are happening. This takes me back to, and you were alive, so let's not get crazy. Kmart, right? When I was at Ralph in LA and Kmart was coming back, and the whole concern was Kmart was being cool and doing these things. I think it might have been a Martha Stewart thing at that time. And it was like, but what happened and their downfall was that they were doing all of this rad marketing, and you would go in, and I would just remember like videos or just seeing the shelves myself, like it was just fucking empty and it was just a shit show. So they were doing all this stuff. People were actually going and finally going to a Kmart, and you'd go there and it was a disaster. And then I think like that's the concern, right? Of moving too quickly. And then I think about like what JCPenney, did is they brought that guy in from Apple, right? Doing really, really cool things, doing really forward things and very cool things, but like they missed the customer. They were doing all of these cool things and they had the product that was right within that. And they were doing those, but like it was, this much of the customer and the entire rest of their customer, like none of that was relevant to. I think the best example of what we've seen to date in this is what Abercrombie's done. Because they got their supply chain right. Like they started figuring that out in tandem with their brand and their marketing being right. And so you're talking about this, you're pushing this out in culture, you're pushing this out in the world, and then you go into stores and it's connected. And so I think there's a real issue if that's not happening. Is your customer relevant to these things, to the cool things that you're doing? And then what's happening in your stores with the product?
Right. I mean, I would also argue that like looking at Abercrombie, for example, like they did interesting things. Like they saw a gap in the most unexpected place, right? The wedding dress, like affordable, cool wedding dress space. And they were like, let's go fill that gap. And I feel like what happened in the Gap when I was in there was they had all these basics. They were not cool cuts. That, like, if I'm gonna have a pair of jeans, like, jeans are a vibe right now, maybe not my vibe, but like the cuts are extreme. And so it's like there are clearly cuts that you could go for, like styles that you could go for. This definitely style, and nothing was relevant, like nothing. So I don't feel like anything that they were doing from like a product development standpoint is really looking at like, who is this customer that we are attracting in droves, and are we giving them any product to actually buy when you're in there?
Right.
Because I was ready to go get some like cool Gap thing that I've never had before, and I wanted like classic Gap things. And these felt like all of the bargain basement versions of the Gap things that I like didn't want to buy. You know, like a tight little crew neck sweater. It was like, there's not like, yeah, that was something that maybe you used to go buy at the Gap, but that's not what like anyone is wearing right now. So that's not helpful.
Right. But the product is there. Like, look at Buck Mason, especially their women's, is killing it. Buck Mason for what, like that, the greats, like that type of product, which Gap represents, is for sure out there, for sure trending, and for sure killing it right now, if done in the right way. It's the fit and the fabrics, which the fabrics I think has been in question for Gap for a while. But.
Yeah. And I would also say if it was in there, I was never finding it because the visual merchandising was just not there. Like we looked at the window. So both of us saw the Gap logo, and then we looked at the window and we go, huh, okay. And we like start going in, and then it's just like a really quick reversal. And we were in the mood to shop. It was like wallets were out and money was like available on the table, and none of that money got sent to the Gap.
Oof.
And that's not
rough.
good. So.
No, not good. That's rough. Okay. Last big topic, which we have to talk about, because I think you shared it with me over the weekend. NueCo.
Oh, man.
Not quite sure
My
what to make
feelings.
of this.
Yeah. I mean, I was almost going to put that as like my must read thing of the week. And then I was like, maybe we should not. So if you haven't read the newsletter or you didn't read what I wrote about it, NueCo, which has been undergoing a rebrand. And I actually thought that their brand, I thought the branding that they had before was not wrong, you know, and it's very interesting to see. And I've wrote about this before, but like the timing of the branding where they've really gone all in on this green that they're doing, and then Sakara is also went all in on a green like in the same week. It was very not opportune timing.
Right. And Seed is obviously
and
been
Seed,
in that color for a while.
Yeah. But Seed, I feel like, is more in the mattes, and these guys are going in like, well, at least NueCo is going really in this metallics kind of space. But anyway, they have these things, and let's call them fragrances, that they're calling functional fragrances, and they've had them. So this is a re-release, right? And so they've always been saying like these fragrances are designed or formulated or whatever to release like certain emotions, and to like not just be like a good scent, but also have like a physical and mental effect on you. And sure, I think smell could 100% have an effect on you.
Idea.
I think like the science, I think, is very murky. Like, I think you could say this scent is uplifting. I'm not sure if I buy that, like, this scent is going to, like, reduce your anxiety on a clinical level, right? Like, I just don't know. I'm not a scent scientist.
It's lavender,
I'm not a scientist at all. So, maybe. And, you know, on the scale of woo-woo things, I like a woo-woo thing. So.
I'm in for woo-woo.
Maybe. But then, this week, they wiped their feed. So it was like, this is a big deal. Fully wiped. And then I see this in my feed that they have this quote of this person, and I'm reading the quote, and the quote is basically somebody saying, I don't want to admit this, but I am an alcoholic, and when I am going through a particularly rough patch, like, I've never been able to kind of stop drinking. I've always kind of relapsed. And now when I smell this functional fragrance, I can't remember which one of the senses it is, I have been able to stay sober. Honestly, like, good for you. And I'm happy for this person. Alcoholism, horrible, real disease. Like, if it's working for you, whatever's working for you, peace be upon you.
Totally.
But what I took issue with is NueCo. This is the first post. This is the first post of this like completely wiped feed, right? And they are taking credit for preventing alcoholism or curing alcoholism. And I was just like, I just can't. Like, what is this? This pseudoscience is just too much for me.
Right. And we know, I mean, beauty claims are like, that's a lot to take on. Like, that's a whole fucking Pandora's box of things that like you don't want to get into.
From
I think both from a
perspective,
legality standpoint, but also just from a positioning standpoint. Because I read it when you shared it with me, and it was the way it was written, and understandably, like, it was very heavy, right? And in literally reading direct from this feed versus, so kind of already setting that.
Yeah, I mean, I sent it to you as a gut check because I was like, is this odd? Like, is this something that odd. People are like, talking about on a regular basis, and I'm just completely out of the loop, and like, this is fine? Yeah, I just think it's really interesting to see where they're going and just generally where brands are going. And I think it's an interesting territory of this. I think we'll see a lot more functional. There's obviously been a lot of functional beverages, but like there's a lot more functional fragrances, a lot more functional skincare. And it's definitely a growing category where they're like claiming to have mental health aspects to their brand. But I just thought it was a really interesting, and they make supplements, and like obviously there's lots and lots of supplements that I think genuinely can like impact your mood. And so it feels, for sure,
I take many of them.
Right. And so it's not like an uncharted space, I suppose. It was just the medical claim around it. Like, I mean, just the letter that they wrote about it just being like, this is why we made this fragrance and da 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 da. And it's like, it just felt really strange.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a unique take for sure. For sure. Yeah. Interested to see where they go with it. All right.
Yeah.
Let's dig into some of the fun stuff.
All right. Go for it.
All right. The Louis Vuitton scaffolding.
Yes. I wanted to talk about this more because I didn't, I feel like with our audience, I think people are fairly savvy. And so I think they know that this is not something new. Louis Vuitton has done this before. It's not like a new party trick.
Years.
They just created like years. But what I think is so interesting, granted, like it's happening in New York, it's not always happening in such a like cultural epicenter and such a major store, right? But such a major location on top of it. But I think that viewing the scaffolding with the new lens of people who aren't into retail or aren't into luxury, who are coming in with this like CGI and everything is fake and like da 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 and oversized, and they like drape like, there's a helicopter that comes in and it pulls off the sheet from the building, and then the building is, like blubbers up into flames, and then like that's what we're watching on social media right now, and it's doing really well, or did, and I think now it's kind of fatigued. But I think that people seeing this in real life now are making that connection, and there's a whole group of people who never paid attention to them, who now have this cultural reference that is making them, like this old thing that they're doing, very exciting to a bunch of new people.
Interesting. And you think it's because like it does, in looking at the actual video of it and knowing like Louis Vuitton's been doing this for decades, right? Decades they've been doing this. But it does, looking at it in the video and looking at it on Fifth, knowing where the flagship is, and of course how intricate and detailed it is and stackable. It does look like the Jacquemus, like, different versions, oversized things that they do that are obviously, CGI kind of AI versions of them that this could be, but certainly isn't. Do you think that
I think it's just like people are seeing it. Exactly. I think that it's like there's been a new lens. We all have a new cultural, or like, I don't even know if we'd call it cultural. It was certainly a cultural moment, but I don't know if it was like we have this new thing that has become popular and had a moment. And now people are seeing that. And for a lot of people, it feels like, wow, they did it in real life. And no one's doing that. And they don't know that they've been doing it in real life forever. And before, when they were doing it in real life, it was always cool. But now people think that it's come out of the internet. And I think it's just very funny and also opportune for Louis Vuitton. Good for them.
Yes.
Because it is getting shared. It is.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think, I mean, it's fascinating is, you know, AI, the new like experiential bar, right? Are we going to see all of these things that are created in CGI or whatever it may be, whatever the technology is. And then it's going to be like, okay, well, how do we create that experience in real life? I mean, you can only imagine what Nike's going to be doing.
Yes, except that just to say that, you know, as we saw like what's the like Oompa Loompa thing that went really badly in Scotland where like everybody wanted to go and it was like, you know, it was like two ladies like with a sad like costume and like everything was terrible. And I think that because people's expectations are really, really high, right? It's when they go to something really sad version of like, oh yeah, we want it to be like like what you saw on the internet, but then you don't pull it off. It's really like amplified terrible. Like everyone's really shocked. But I think, but for brands that have that ability to pull those things off, Louis Vuitton, like Nike, who are experienced at creating these amazing things and have been doing this for 20 plus years, decades. Like this is your moment to shine if it's like you're gonna start doing things like this, because I think it will feel larger to life to a lot of new people who've never seen that because people stopped doing that. And so I just think it's an interesting thing to think about, is that your bigger than life actions now, maybe you've been doing them for a while, but they might, like your old bag of party tricks might need to come out because we're now living in a different time.
I am here for an old bag of party tricks for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Last thing we're going to dig on is Yeti.
Yeah. Yeti's having a big 2024, big 2025 apparently coming down the pipe. But yeah, I was thinking about them because they've opened 6 stores this year. When we were in Austin this time exactly last year, right? Yep. We went to their store.
Thanksgiving holiday.
Exactly. So we went to their store and it didn't feel that amazing, but like the product is, I mean, talk about the opposite problem to I Feel the Gap, where it was like, I would go in there and buy that cooler regardless of what's going on. Like, I mean, it felt very dated, and that store I think has been there for a while. It's one of their first stores, so it's probably due to get kind of a revamp. I think when I saw the photos of the other stores that they've launched, they feel like a little bit more modern. But I think one of the things that's really interesting to me, seeing them go like more into stores, is that they obviously are beginning to think of themselves as like more than a cooler brand, you know?
Yes.
They obviously have extended into, you know, mugs and all of that space, but I could 100% see them becoming like the modern Bass Pro Shop. Like totally. I would buy a fishing rod from Yeti and expect it to be a cool, durable fishing rod. And if they said
I completely agree. Yeah. And it's such a rad brand, but I think it's fascinating. It's fascinating that you bring this up now, because I think it is, their product has always started functional first and then it became cool, right? Like they've made that same fucking coffee mug probably forever, but when they started doing bright colors, I'm like, I'm in. Right. But before that, if it's just the regular one, like, no thanks. But I'm sure it's functional and works as well as it did when they started it.
List for this year.
Okay, what color? Just asking for a friend.
It just needs to fit in my cup holder. That's my big thing.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah,
I might have Dave measure those. But I think what's fascinating is I was actually listening to, I think it's the head of marketing on the Courageous podcast, because I was listening to a podcast that we're going to be on and kind of hearing kind of what his format and just trying to dig in a bit. But it was really interesting, and I completely agree with what the host Ryan said was, this is a brand that hasn't changed. And I was thinking a lot about that. And I don't think the brand has changed. I think what's happened is, it changed a bit, not the brand, but kind of the products that they were doing, all the things that they were doing. And then they came out this fucking rad cooler that we all have that you can put 6-pack, couple bottles of wine in, whatever that is, take it to the beach or wherever you're going. And it's so functional. The zipper, it's cool looking. It does all of the things that it should do. It's simple, but again, it's tying back to exactly what it was. It's just probably now offered in more colors. They have an orange and kind of this and that. But I think what's happened is the brands kept going where it's going, and then it's cool colors, this, and then culturally we've come into this place where they've kind of aligned, and we do want all of these functional, cool, like a little bit of rough and tumble. That's rad, but do it in a cool color. And that connection is like, yes, the brand's super hot, and I'll take more, please.
Yeah, but I think they've always stuck to, having really high quality product that really listens to kind of the consumer that they have. Like when I've bought Yeti for, I don't know, a dozen people at this point, and I buy different ones each time. Like, it's interesting. Like, what I bought for myself, I bought for other people, but I've also bought other things that I'm like, oh yeah, like this one makes much more sense for their lifestyle and da da da. And I think they're really listening to that. But I do think, like, I can see them getting into sports gear, like more outdoor sports space.
Yeah.
I could see them kind of becoming this trusted outdoorsman, but like the cool, like maybe you're not like my brother, essentially, like
bougie outdoorsman, let's be clear.
Part-time, like very discerning outdoorsman, right? When my brother wanted a chair, he wanted like a rocking chair, and he sent me the specific one. It wasn't like I could go on and just buy any rocking chair he wanted.
Right. It's got to fit with Arc'teryx and all of the other, like,
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think that they could expand into more categories and do it well. So that would be interesting to see what they do.
I 100% agree. And I think it's also, again, through this podcast and understanding more about it, but I think we know this, is it's a brand that's not going, like, we've tested this and we've figured out this. It's a brand that started, these are the guys, these are the founders, and they were, I think, fishermen. And that's exactly what they started with. And they wanted, they were building boats, I think, and wanted a cooler, but like an elevated cooler for their boat that fit on there and you could sit on so you can see the line and do all the things. And that's what they created it for. And I think there's a difference in brands that start and are created by that kind of force. And typically it's a founder that's actually like creating it for them or solving a problem that they need or they're close to, versus somebody sitting in a lab and going, I bet this money or this idea could make a lot of money. Let's create a shoe that's light and travel and blah, blah, blah.
But I think they've also expanded slowly. And I know this is hard for brands to do now. And they, began in a very different time and came up very slowly. But I think they're taking their time. We've worked with them and worked alongside them rather at other events that we've worked on, like when we've done golf tournaments and things like that for other brands. And they always show up at kind of the right events that are cool, definitely sportsmen, but like not necessarily just typical like golf events, for example. These would be cooler golf events. So I think it's just interesting to see how they've kind of developed that. And I think there's just a much bigger space, and it'll be interesting to see, obviously having retail stores versus kind of becoming something that you stock in other, like going from a wholesale mentality to having a more retailer mentality is something that you and I have talked about a lot, like certainly consulted on with many, many brands. And I think that will be an interesting to see is if they can pull that off, because I know you have strong feelings about that, but that's not necessarily easy to do.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's a very different mentality. And I think they can do it because I think they're a brand, trying to think of what the word is. To me, it's a brand of integrity, right? It's the way Patagonia is. I would buy anything that I liked from them. I would buy because I would assume, just like Patagonia, that it's good quality. I'm not going to like everything from that particular brand, really from any brand, but anything that I liked, I would get because I absolutely know it's going to have that quality. And I think that they've, to your point, grown slowly in that way, and that you really believe them and buy that from them. But I do think transitioning into that, because retail and how you show up and everything from the merchandising, the store, the team, right? Making sure everybody's acting in the same way, because you can really fuck up. And going from wholesale, as we've literally taught this, it's a mentality shift, right? Because wholesale, you're worried about and focused on very, very different things. Than retail, you're suddenly front facing, and you've got to, you can worry about the same things, but you need to articulate them and position them in very, very different ways.
Give me more examples. Give me more specifics, because I've heard your spiel, but like, give the people what they want. You're just being too vague.
I think it's big. I think it's like talking about Nike, or what was that wool brand that we worked on? It's like, in wholesale, you're worried about kind of this particular version, the shelf space, what your signage is like, what your particular area in somebody else's store is like, and dealing with it's very internal, dealing with the internal salespeople. Hey, buddy, let's get a beer afterwards, dealing with that. In retail, you are suddenly front facing into the world, and somebody wants to, it's basically like open kimono. It's much more vulnerable, and it has to be much stronger of a brand. All of those parts and pieces are still there and important, but you now have to consider every single aspect front and center, so that when somebody comes into your retail store, you're not just a little section at Dick's or, in REI, you are now the entire retail experience. So when you walk in, how are you greeted? Because what is the vibe? Because Yeti has a very specific vibe, and like, how are you greeted? What's the vibe of the person who's opening the door or not opening the door, the first person that you see? What's the visual merchandising like? What's the signage like? What's, do you get a bottle of water? Is there a bathroom? Like, all of those parts and pieces that aren't just product specific. You can do a great job in the product, but now you're really putting brand first, and you're putting experience first. And you have to have those things in addition to the brand, I think, front and center when you're focused on retail versus wholesale.
Yeah. I would also assume that people are using their retail experience as they're going in to try the coolers, like to see them, to see the options, to see all the colors in person, to see if the size is right. But they might not be actually walking out with that cooler that day. And so I think it's interesting to think of as because some of their coolers, they're small houses. Like, you're not necessarily like, oh yeah, I'll take it to go. There is no bag to put that cooler in that would ever make sense.
No bag for the bag.
Right. There's not even a shopping cart that necessarily makes sense for one of those. So, you might be walking out, and then what are you walking out looking like? And that could be also interesting. But I think it's just interesting to think of it like their particular stores are also potentially more of a showcase and a trialing experience. And then you're really going to go shop online and make the... Totally. Which is think the modern story, I guess, today.
Right. But think through that experience. Like, why did REI have a climbing wall? Yeah, okay, some people are probably really trying out their climbing shoes and whatever, but the majority of, you're just further articulating what the brand is about.
I will say that when I bought my Adidas from a very nice bougie store in Zurich that had a hiking thing, when I was buying my hiking shoes, that experience did sell me on those shoes. I was the guy was if you're walking downhill, then your shoe, your toe needs to be here. When you're going uphill, your heel needs to be here, and the shoes fit. And I do think, the biggest complaint that I hear all the time about Yeti is I had no idea how heavy that cooler would be when I actually put everything in it. So I bought my brother a big one, and he was and he ended up this is how much he liked that cooler. He ended up getting himself a smaller cooler in addition, because he's if I start lugging that to the beach or lugging that on hiking trips, that is, it's like carrying 3 small adults, between you and your friends, So
it is.
I do think it's interesting that they can use these physical experiences to kind of give you that sense, because I think that's probably one of their biggest return things is hey, this actually is too heavy. So when I was buying I bought mine for breast milk, and a best cooler ever for breast milk, highly, highly recommend. It'll keep that stuff frozen forever. When I bought the first one, I bought the hard one, and I was absolutely not. I can't be lugging this thing around with me. It looks so much cuter and smaller in person. So, Anyway, I think that's just interesting, the opportunities that they could have to kind of resolve what I would imagine to be a big return issue, which obviously
For sure. For sure. And I think thinking that through is really important. But I think going back to your experience, that was a really positive experience and sold you on the hiking shoes. If it's a shitty experience, you know, where like they don't have anything and like there's a few boxes and it's just not a great experience, it can do the opposite. And so that's why I think retail is like you're suddenly in the limelight and it's real important. And you want to not just not fuck it up, you want to really do an amazing job because it can really take your brand and somebody can really understand the purchasing power and the brand at the same time.
Completely. Well, did we hit everything that you wanted to talk about?
We hit everything. I mean, there's so much more, but yes, we did it. Under 55 minutes. Let's call it.
Yeah. Bye.
Till next time.
Yeah. See you later.